Back in the fall of 2003, St. Louis Rams offensive lineman Andrew McCullum could have been seen as the poster boy for NFL toughness. Over 10 grueling pro seasons, he'd never missed a single game. But the biggest threat to McCullum's career ultimately came not from a violent tackle or a torn ligament, but rather from a small bruise. One he didn't realize at the time could have led to severe fevers, organ failure, even death.
It was more of like just a little irritating thing. It was started off as one of the turf burns, on your knee, and I thought it had healed up pretty good.
But when the healing stopped and a gruesome infection set in, McCullum got it checked out.
It was painful.
Yeah. Once it got kind of a little bit worse, it opened up a little bit, and they started, they kept it packed with gauze and stuff. It was kind of nasty, to be honest with you.
Nasty.
It was kind of nasty looking.
Did you realize what it was right away?
No, we didn't.
Dr. Matthew Matava, the Rams' head team physician, first suspected a simple staph infection, a common and easily treated skin condition often passed around by athletes living in close quarters. But the antibiotics that usually cure staph weren't working, and it wasn't only McCullum that Dr. Matava was worried about. 4 other Rams developed peculiar skin infections that he didn't know how to treat.
Several of the players actually had lesions that required drainage, surgical drainage. Typical staph infections will just show as a reddened area. These actually were like a boil, very hard boil, often the size of a golf ball even. And when you have that kind of a problem, you know that there's something besides the usual staph infection.
It wasn't like it flared up or anything of that nature.
Some players, it actually did flare up and actually went deep into the tissue.
The mysterious disease that Dr. Matava was seeing was actually a new mutated form of staph, which until then was virtually unheard of outside of hospitals. Now, seemingly overnight, it was all over the NFL. Multiple players were infected on teams, including the Miami Dolphins, the Houston Texans, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Cleveland Browns. Several players, including the Dolphins' Junior Seau and the Browns' Ben Taylor, had such serious cases that they were hospitalized. So Dr. Matava and the Rams, terrified that their outbreak could get worse, invited the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, to turn their home turf into a science lab.
Staph is the most common cause of skin infections, and now really the difference is that it's drug resistant.
Jeff Hageman of the CDC identified the germ plaguing the Rams as methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, known as MRSA or MRSA. This new MRSA is essentially a super staph that evolved from the ordinary staph, acquiring both an immunity to the most commonly used antibiotics and an attraction to athletes, especially football players.
I think football and these team settings are really the areas that there could be outbreaks of disease because they're in such close quarters and there is a lot of skin contact and they do get a lot of skin abrasions.
What are the symptoms if you potentially had MRSA? What would I see first?
It may start out as a simple boil or a pussy lesion and get larger, but staph can then invade the bloodstream and it can cause high fevers. It can get into different organs. Anywhere that staph can get, wherever your bloodstream is, it can invade those tissues. And usually when we hear about these severe cases, people can die.
For the MRSA bacteria to begin its potentially lethal offensive, it first has to penetrate the skin.
Staph really needs an open spot on the skin to invade, and whether that's as simple as a hair follicle or kind of a really micro abrasion like from a razor shaving or from a turf burn.
To grasp this link between turf burns and the new MRSA bacteria risk, consider this. Through a player survey, the CDC concluded that linemen and linebackers suffered the most turf abrasions. Guess the positions of the 5 Rams infected with MRSA.
They're linemen, linebackers. They're the ones usually in the pile making the tackles, and so that risk of getting these abrasions is probably higher in that group.
In order to prevent abrasions and cuts from getting infected, the CDC advised the Rams to improve their cleaning and bandaging of open wounds. Still, MRSA bacteria can flourish outside of game conditions, especially when there's poor hygiene. The CDC even saw hazards on the Rams' bench.
There's a couple towels on the back of the bench that as the players would come off the field, they would wipe the sweat off, and potentially be wiping an infected area or a wound with a towel that was potentially contaminated.
When you sit down on the bench, you grab whatever towel's laying there, and if you need a towel, that's what you use.
But staph contamination can also thrive in the locker rooms and training areas where players, often sweaty and with open wounds, frequently take whirlpool treatments.
We did find staph in the pools. If MRSA were to get in there, that was a potential way that it could have been transmitted.
Did the players take showers before they got into the whirlpool?
There were signs to suggest that they should be taking showers.
To suggest?
But McCullum admits that those signs were often ignored.
It always says, please take a shower before you go into the whirlpool.
Right.
You think a lot of guys didn't?
No, not all the time.
But if MRSA can flourish in a luxurious NFL training facility like this one with full-time trainers and physicians in attendance, then it is clearly even more of a threat in the typical run-of-the-mill high school or college locker room. In fact, MRSA is probably present in almost every American football facility, which means that this powerful infection can sometimes, sadly, produce the most terribly tragic result.
He was a strong kid, healthy, very outgoing, friendly, funny, had a lot of friends. He was a great kid.
Back in 2003, Teresa Drew's 21-year-old son, Ricky Linetti, number 19, was a star wide receiver for Division III Lycoming College in Pennsylvania.
Ricky Linetti, touchdown Lycoming!
But the night before a big game his senior year, he called his mother in a panic.
He called me about 4 in the morning. He said, you have to come get me, I'm really sick. And that's when I went and got him, and he couldn't walk. I called the coach, and we took him to the hospital. As soon as they laid him down on the bed, he just started vomiting.
Was he conscious at all, Teresa?
Yes. At first he was. He said, can I play football tomorrow? And I said, no, I don't think you're going to be able to play tomorrow. He said, well, I'll be out of here soon.
But soon after getting to the emergency room, Linetti was rushed to intensive care as doctors tried to figure out why the young athlete's body was shutting down.
They really didn't know what they had. And then they called in specialists, infectious disease specialists. I mean, every organ was going.
That same night, Ricky Linetti died, leaving his family and team devastated, his mother grasping for answers.